Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being so prompt. We have a power-packed panel today. Before we begin, I'd like to introduce both our speakers. Our first speaker is Dr. Toni. She is the National Secretary for Climate Change for the Ministry of Environment and Energy, Environment and Climate Change, Brazil. She'll be joining us virtually today. Dr. Toni has a long career in promoting projects and public policies focused on social justice, the environment, and climate change. She's held numerous prestigious roles, such as the Executive Director of Institute for Climate and Society, founding partner of Public Interest Management, to name just a few. She's also a member of Brazilian Women Leader for Sustainability Network. Our second speaker is Ambassador Kevin Magron. He's the French climate ambassador. He's a climate diplomat, he's a career diplomat, and has worked on climate and energy issues, holding several key positions over the years, such as the diplomatic advisor of the minister in charge of climate, environment, and energy, and he negotiated the Fit for 55 package of the EU Green Deal during the French presidency of the European Union. A very warm welcome to both our panelists. So without further ado, my first set of questions are to you, Dr. Toni. Brazil has been a key player in designing the development, environment, and climate agenda, and has a rich history of building bridges and achieving consensus between the different global interests, whether it is leading the historic Rio conference or contributing to the structural concepts such as sustainable development and SDGs. The world is at a critical juncture in our fight against climate change, while simultaneously responding to multiple concurrent urgent challenges amidst rising geopolitical tensions. Given Brazil's track record, how do you see its leadership working to promote ambition and collaboration on climate and development agenda in a multipolar world? And how can Brazil use its dual role as this year's G20 and next year COP30's presidencies to build on COP28's energy goals of tripling RE, doubling energy efficiency by 2030, transitioning away from fossil fuels, while aligning ambition with President Lula's focus on reducing economic inequality under Brazil's G20 presidency? So, not very complicated questions, but over to you, Dr. Toni. You've about 3 minutes to get them.
Thank you so much. I cannot see you, but hopefully you can hear me.
We can hear you loud and clear.
That's good, thank you. So first of all, I want to congratulate and thank E3G for the invitation. I think it's a key that we're talking politics here, because normally, as was mentioned in the former panels, we discuss all types of transition, but not the political transition that we needed to go through in order to get to 1.5. But in relation to Brazil, I mean, I'm glad that obviously with the change in the government, we were able to have and to exercise the leadership that Brazil has been used to for a long time. As we all know, the convention was born here in Brazil, the Climate Convention in '92, and I think that has helped Brazil to play that role. And I think at the moment, what Brazil is trying to do is twofold. First of all, through our presidency on G20, and perhaps the most important move that we made is to the Climate Task Force. And in the Climate Task Force, the major goal that we are debating is about the economic transformation nationally and globally that we need to take. And I think for the first time, we have been able to build a forum, not only of climate ministers and envoys, but we also have in that forum, in the G20, climate ministers, financial or economic ministers, central bank, and foreign affairs ministries. So putting together these 4 players sitting around the table to see what are the solutions that we can look at in terms of the climate solutions in order to get into implementation, and why are we so slow in getting into implementation, I think is being a really innovative way to look at the climate issues. And I can tell you that the debates under the G20 has been extremely helpful, because it's clear, and again was discussed here, until we are able to look at the financial flows going beyond US, Europe, and China, and getting financial flows going also to the broader, the South and other emerging countries, we are not going to be able to really do the transformation that we would like. And I think in the G20, we are being able to really look much beyond the billions that is being discussed in the NQCG debate in the UNFCCC, but we are really broadening up on how can we align already private, public, national and international financial flows in order to the bigger economic and development transformations that we are all looking at. So that, I think, is one small contribution that Brazil has done, is the climate task force. Next year, Brazil will be the president of both BRICS Plus and COP30. And I wanted to pause a little bit on the BRICS Plus, because I think the BRICS Plus is a really important new player in on the climate game, has never been seen as one. But as you know, there is now a task force under the BRICS to already debate climate. And I think would be a very important new forum for us to align investments under also climate. And finally, on COP30, and I know there is a lot of expectation for the COP30, and everybody's talking about COP30 being the COP of the NDCs, but I needed to remind everybody that NDCs aligned to 1.5, hopefully, will be coming by the end of this year, beginning of next year, and NDCs are not really for negotiations at COPs. So we are ready through Troika and joint Troika, as you know, we are already putting a lot of effort on not only leading by example with our own NDC, but also supporting other countries that wanted and could be much more ambitious. But the COP in COP30 will not be negotiating NDCs. I'm hoping that the COP30 in Brazil will be a COP of a just transition. What exactly does it mean in a multipolar world in which we needed to go beyond just the forum of the UNFCCC? Climate now has extrapolated all the different international forums, and we needed to do so. And in order, what is exactly needed to be discussed at the UNFCCC, at COPs, and what must also be discussed in other forums. So what we are looking for is not just the economic transformation that we all need to go through and new models of development and growth, but specifically we need to start talking about the political transformations that we also need nationally and internationally. What's the politics aligned to 1.5, and what are the international forums that needed to be transformed for us to get us there? I stop it here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Toni. So moving from maybe G20 to G7 to you, Ambassador Magron. The recent G7 Leaders Summit had a few positive outcomes on grids, on storage, but by most accounts fell short of the ambition on action plans and timelines that was desired and required. France has been an advocate for ambitious climate action, and President Macron has also called for a precise timeline on phasing out fossil fuels. But what, in your view, can the G7 leaders do to deliver on the COP28's energy goals domestically and support their delivery globally? And what can the G7 and G20 do between now and November to ensure that we have strong positive outcomes in COP29 in Baku?
Thank you very much, Madhura, and thank you for inviting me here and to E3G for this wonderful, wonderful event. And my greetings to Anna, which I will see in Task Force Clima in 2 weeks in Brazil. Very happy to be with you on this panel because we count on your leadership, and we need Brazil, in fact, more than ever in these coming 2 years. Just before answering directly your question on the G7, and we're also part on the G20, so I could eventually jump from one to another. Just to say, I mean, what's the most important thing, and I think Anna highlighted that as well, is to have a shared vision of the way forward. And at the moment, and especially after Dubai and the UAE consensus, what I see is a lot of divergences and a battle of interpretation over what we achieved at last COP in Dubai. Why? Because it goes extremely deep, extremely wide into the transformation of our economies, and especially the paragraph 28 on phasing out fossil fuels. That for many countries and for the whole economy, we still depend on 80% of fossil fuels in the global economy. So you can imagine how deep that goes into transforming our system and development. And 6 months, not only 6 months after, but the COP in Dubai, we can see that a lot of countries are now taking this, what we call the global stocktake decision, as a menu of option. And we need a space to speak about this transitioning away from fossil fuels on mitigation, ambition as well. And we can see it's very difficult at the moment. So what can we do? First thing, I mean, you asked me about the G7. We had a G7 leaders summit recently, and I was in Torino negotiating the climate part, and with some people in the room, by the way. And we've been trying to be as ambitious as we could be to operationalize the decision of Dubai. What does that mean? It means to implement it. And how do you implement it if you have to phase away fossil fuels? You need national plans, or you need policies, or you need targets, or milestones, or time frames. Now, with some of our G7 partners to have time frames, it was too difficult, probably to phase out coal. We eventually came out with a date in the first half of the 2030 decade. So that's good. In the UK, I think by the end of the year, you'll be phasing out entirely coal. In France, it'll be 2027. And we have now a date for coal, but we have to go beyond that. We have to go on oil and gas, and obviously it's not the same issue for Brazil, for France, for developing countries, for those who don't have the means of implementation of their NDCs, to take the jargon of UNFCCC, or for rich countries. And we will have to lead the way in the G7 countries also to phase out these fossil fuels. That means, for instance, for France, what we are trying to do now, you probably have followed the electoral cycle in Europe and especially in my country. But what we're trying to do is to have a 5-year plans on energy that is consistent with these goals, and to have by 2030 a decrease of oil consumption, and by 2040 the same, and to get carbon neutral by 2050. That's extremely important. And to quote Fatih Birol from the International Energy Agency, we're going to have to act on the demand. It's not only asking Saudi Arabia or the UAE or others. We're going to have to act on the demand with courageous and bold public policies to phase out fossil fuels. Now, of course, the G7 is just one forum, but the G20 is extremely important. And that's why Brazil is so key at this very moment, because we know we have a discussion on the financing by this year and by Baku. And a lot of developing countries, and sometimes rightly so, are telling us, well, NDCs for us, you know, it's a piece of paper if we don't have the money to implement it. So help us implement it and give us the appropriate means in order for us to keep the ambition as high as it needs to be in line with the Paris Agreement. And next year is the 10th year of the Paris Agreement. And we're going to have to demonstrate that this methodology, this collaborative way of dealing with the climate crisis is working. And that means more transparency, That's absolutely crucial that all the countries give transparency and trajectories on the long run in order to meet these targets.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Magron. I think you touched upon several points. And in the interest of time, I'm going to pose a question to both of you, and maybe 2 minutes each for response. Again, I'm going to make it very simple question. To you, Dr. Toni, I think it will be really interesting, given the context that both you and Ambassador Magron were talking about, that we need both domestic action to also help in fostering global collaborations. So what do you think that Brazil could do domestically to sort of set the tone for ambition for next year's COP30, and also in a way that could help in sort of counter the seemingly populist backlash against higher climate sort of ambitions? Do you think this is a challenge, and how could this be potentially addressed to help also lead towards more successful outcomes?
I mean, Brazil, first of all, very nice to see you, Kevin, and I look forward to see you in Belém. But Brazil is in a good position. We have a very ambitious NDC. Since 2015, our NDC says that we are going to decarbonize by 2030 on 53%. That means we have an NDC that's more ambitious than, say, the US, Canada, Australia, and we are an emerging country. So it's not lack of ambition that some of the emerging countries like Brazil has. And as was suggested is, we have the ambitions, we have the plans. Now we have obviously a government that wants to implement those plans. We need to make sure that we have the means of implementation. And we are not talking in case of a country like Brazil, and we cannot obviously compete with a country like Ethiopia, Malawi, that needs much more public concessional money than a country like Brazil. What we need is investment flowing in the other direction. If the world was rational, countries like Brazil that has a power sector around 90% totally renewable, we would see a lot of investment of companies coming to Brazil to produce their products in Brazil. More than 50% of our entire energy sector is already decarbonized or renewable. But the world is not rational. And that's why most of the investment and the production is still in places that are very carbon intensive. So I think if we wanted to solve the climate problem, we needed to look at the globe and see where can we produce the goods that we need to produce in the lowest, not only the most cost-effective countries, but with the lowest carbon intensity. But that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing, I mean, fortunately, countries like the US or Europe have your own money to invest in the carbonization of your new Green Deals. That's not the case of many countries like Brazil. We don't have the fiscal space. So that's why I go back to let us look at the financial flows, how they are moving in the world, then we will see if we get there. I think Brazil is in a very good path. Just last year, deforestation has gone down more than 50%.
If you could wrap up, please.
Yeah, so I think we're doing our part, but I think what we needed now is some of the developed countries to also do their part about their NDCs and be more ambitious with theirs.
Thank you so much, Dr. Toni. And then Ambassador Magron, coming to you.
In a minute and a half, very difficult,
Yes.
but two elements to it. To just build up on what Anna just said. We have launched in France something called the Paris Pact for People on the Planet, and President Macron last year did a big summit on reforming the international financial system. Why? Because even with all the public money and all the budget money that we'll put on the table, we will never match the needs of the transition in the global south or in developing countries or emerging economies. So what we're going to have is we're going to need the private sector and the markets to come in, and we have to reform a system which is not fit for purpose anymore, because investment don't go in the south where 2/3 of the population of the globe is living. So that's something that we will need to work very strongly if we want to answer these challenges, next to our responsibility, obviously, to come up on the public part. On the last part, it's the most important one, I think, the political side of your question. And I think internally, what you need absolutely is to give a vision of how the future would look like with a transition, a successful transition. You need to give a desirable future for the people and hope, and what it can bring green jobs, it can bring employment, better health, and it's not only problems, or it's not only imposed on populations, on societies. This transition and this climate is not only something which we're going to have to suffer from, and we're going to have to pay for only. It's also opportunities, and we have to seize that and get a more positive narrative around the transition globally.
Thank you so much, Ambassador Magron and Dr. Toni. I think this has been a really useful sort of last message to end with, and also leads in really well to the next panel that is going to look at partnerships that can help us in navigating these geopolitical tensions as well. But what is clear definitely is that we need more collaborations, especially looking at finance and trying to sort of bridge the gap between development in the North and the South. Thank you very much for such an interesting session. And thank you, audience. You've been really great. Thank you.